From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
From arming police on the campus in Kingston to potentially building on 195 land in Providence. It's far from a sleepy summer at the University of Rhode Island. Our guest on the first half of Newsmakers, URI President Dr. David Dooley. Then, the postmortem on the 2015 legislative session and testing government transparency with our guest on the second half, the Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island, John Marion. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Ted Nesi is off this week, so we welcome back political reporter from Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Hello, everyone. Dr. Dooley, it's been a long time. Great to have you back on the program.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So we've got a lot to discuss. Ian and I want to talk to you about the 195 land, the nursing school, arming campus police, of course, but I want to take sort of a broader look at the University of Rhode Island right now from a financial perspective. Look, I think it's safe to say Rhode Island, the state of Rhode Island, isn't known for being a national leader on spending for higher education. URI gets a little over, correct me if I'm wrong, a little under $100 million from the state's general revenue. That number means little to the people that are watching right now. So put it in perspective for us. Quite simply, do you think the university gets enough financial support from the state?
Well, two things on that. One, there's no question that if you look at the most recent statistics, Rhode Island's still in the bottom handful of states in public spending and public investment in higher education on either a per capita basis, a per $1,000 of earned income basis, or a per student basis.
So however you slice it.
However you slice it, we're in the bottom handful of states in the United States for spending. The good news about that is it's been improving lately. And I think beginning under Governor Lincoln Chafin, continuing through Governor Raimondo's first budget, and with really a lot of enthusiastic support inside the General Assembly, particularly amongst the House and Senate leadership and the rank and file, Rhode Island actually, in contrast to many states in the United States, has been investing more in recent years.
But less than Massachusetts.
But less than Massachusetts, but the trend is up, and that's a very, very positive development, and we're very appreciative of that. We came away with a couple million more dollars in general operating support for the University of Rhode Island from this last legislative session based on the governor's budget, and that was finally enacted by the legislature. That's a strong positive step. It enables us to keep tuition increases low, and that's our goal, is to try to maintain our affordability as best we can.
Well, you have a lot of goals, though, and of course that's a big one, and you've talked a lot about research, increasing money for research, and you really didn't actually answer the question. I think you're being polite, but the main question was, do we spend enough?
I think the answer to that is we need to invest more. If we want to keep higher education in Rhode Island affordable, if we want to make sure that all Rhode Islanders who are interested in and qualified to pursue higher education, particularly at the University of Rhode Island, we need to invest more publicly. I think that the facts are clear on that. What I'm encouraged about is that's the trend in Rhode Island. And I think we have a very strong base to continue to do that.
As you say, the trend line for state funding is up. Have you seen other changes with Gina Raimondo taking over as governor in terms of what it means for URI?
One of the things we're really excited about is that if you look at the economic development package that the governor put forward and was enacted, there are significant opportunities in there for the University of Rhode Island, for other higher education institutions to participate in building a more robust, successful state economy, which I think is in everyone's interest. I mean, the Wavemaker program, which provides an incentive for graduates, particularly in the STEM fields, to stay in Rhode Island and work here, that's a positive step forward. I think the Innovation Voucher Program, which enables companies to come to the University of Rhode Island and get technical or other kinds of assistance and be compensated, and the University of Rhode Island would be compensated for that, that's a very positive. We're enthusiastic about those steps. So I think there are a number of things that the state has done recently, but I would be very remiss if I didn't point to the enthusiastic and really, for me, overwhelming positive support of the voters of Rhode Island whenever a general obligation bond appears on the ballot to build new facilities at URI. That support has been astonishing.
Short of more state funding, what would it take to make URI into a more powerful economic catalyst for Rhode Island?
Short of more state funding?
Yes.
I think a couple of things. One, we've been seeking ways that we can operate more efficiently. So we're talking to to Raimondo's administration, the governor directly, about how we can do that, ways that we can sort of, in a certain sense, give us a little bit more autonomy, a little bit more flexibility in how we do things to manage our work more efficiently and effectively, and to work more effectively and flexibly and responsively with the private sector as well as the public sector. So there are some things that they're looking at that could help us in that. I think positioning and advocating for, I think, federal investment in research funds is important for all of us. Frankly, our federal government has really done a terrible job at, I think, providing adequate funding to fuel the innovation engine of the United States, which increasingly in the post-World War II era has been university-based research and development.
We're speaking with Dr. David Dooley, the president of the University of Rhode Island. Another big responsibility, I suppose, for the Raimondo administration is what to do with the Route 195 land, or the land freed up by the relocation of 195. A major life sciences project has been proposed for that area. Wexford Science and Technology is one of the two major developers. What is URI's potential involvement here?
Significant is the short answer to that question. We've been at the table. I think one of the reasons I think it's fair to say that Wexford is very interested in an investment in Providence, Rhode Island, and in coming and working with us about this, is they're very enthusiastic about the partnership between Brown University and the University of Rhode Island. That's what they look for. They're always looking, their developments, if you look at them, are always based on an anchor tenant composed of research university or research universities, if you look at what they do. So they're very excited about the URI-Brown collaboration.
And what would be URI's financial commitment?
Well, still to be determined. I think Brown's is still to be determined. But what we're talking about is a significant amount of square footage in a scientific R&D space up there, in which we would have programs that could collaborate well with Brown, that could collaborate well with the health organizations, the hospitals and others in the Providence area. We do a lot of biomedical research, medical device research. A lot of that would actually be, I think, well served and able to expand and grow more than it could at Kingston if it had a Providence-based location. So that's what we're in conversations about. And I can just tell you that our ambition is a significant amount of space and a significant presence with Brown in a facility like that.
Since you're at the table, real quick, is the state close to a deal here? Can you give us an update? It's sort of been quiet.
It has been quiet, and I think that's because there's a lot happening behind the scenes. I'm not aware of everything, but I know that Dick Galvin and his firm Commonwealth Ventures, you know, they're the group that's behind the construction of the Nursing Education Center.
Right.
We've got a great working relationship with them. Dick is leading the charge. He's one of the individuals who brought Wexford into the state. And it's early stages, a lot of due diligence that they're doing, a lot of due diligence that we have to do about what does this look like, who could be the early sort of tenants beyond URI and Brown, and those conversations are ongoing. That's about as much as I know.
American City Business Journals did a ranking of public universities earlier this year. They looked at 434 universities. URI ranked 153rd. That sounds pretty good, but URI placed behind its public counterparts from every other New England state except for Maine. Do you agree with that ranking? And if so, what's the explanation for it?
A couple of things behind it. I'm not familiar with that particular ranking, but first of all, you have UMass Amherst and UConn are much larger institutions than the University of Rhode Island in enrollment, in expenditures, in total research budgets. So for the kinds of metrics that ranking agencies tend to look at, we're never going to be ranked as highly as UMass Amherst or the University of Connecticut on a scale basis. The University of Vermont has a medical school. That's a huge economic driver up there and attracts a lot of again, federal funding around medical research and biomedical research in there. Also a somewhat larger institution than the University of Rhode Island. So I'm not surprised by that. I think in part, though, URI tends to be, in my judgment, and you might expect me to say this, I think underrated in these kinds of things. I think we still have to do a better job of getting the story out there, because there's always a reputational sort of element in these rankings, typically based on either reviews or surveys or some kind of thing. And I think that's where typically we suffer. And let's remember also that URI's growth as a research university really shot up only a few years ago. And so I think both the reputation and the total magnitude of our research operation has lagged behind our peers, but is growing, I think, robustly now. We had like everybody, a little setback with sequestration, which severely constrained the federal research budgets for the last couple of years. But I'm really satisfied that we're on a good trajectory.
President Dooley, we tape this program on a Friday morning. A lot of people are watching this on a Sunday. Last night, a gunman walked into a movie theater in Louisiana and opened fire. And it certainly feels like mass shootings are in the news a lot. I think it's safe to say. Is this why you wanted to arm campus police?
Yes. Short answer. I mean, we have a very safe campus. We're not worried about campus crime, to be honest. I mean, it's a very safe campus. I think the statistics that we report via the Clery Act and others will demonstrate that. It's a beautiful and location that we have, but our campus is open, very open. As I have repeatedly said since coming in Rhode Island, it's not very far from Providence or anywhere to the University of Rhode Island. People can come from all over New England and be on our campus, and they frequently do. We have all kinds of events that attract people to campus. The campus is open, as most university campuses are. It's a welcoming campus. That always presents an opportunity, albeit very small, for some terrible incident to take place, like has happened, as you said, sort of, it seems, with increasing frequency here in the United States. It was my conviction when I came, we were unprepared to deal with that. And you may remember the false alarm we had more than a year ago. That taught us fundamentally, and this came out as a recommendation from the state police, the attorney general, and our local police force, loud and clear after that alarm. URI has to be prepared to be the first responder. They can't get there fast enough.
Do you sleep better at night knowing that URI police are armed?
I do. I think it's better for our students. I know it was controversial. There are many people who still disagree with the decision, but I think it was the right decision for us because we had that recommendation to be the first responder. It would have been irresponsible, in a certain sense, for the university not to act on that recommendation to be prepared to be the first responder. And that's what we now are prepared to be. Our officers are highly trained, go through the same training as the state police and every other local police department. They're experienced. Many of them had served years on a police force where they were armed. They're dedicated professionals, and they have the enormous advantage of knowing the campus and knowing the students and having a better sense of who's there, who belongs, who might not.
Dr. Dooley, the South Street Power Station nursing school project, Ted Nisi, my colleague, and Ian have done some reporting on this, and at last check, that project still hadn't nailed down its financing. You worried about that? Are you confident it's going to get done in time?
I have asked that question of our partners on multiple occasions because, you know, it's been a while since we completed everything and got a legislative approval for the leases. I think my understanding is that the closure of the financing has taken longer than anticipated because of the complexity of the tax credit issues and law and some recent decisions that complicated all of the how to calculate, finance, and handle the tax credits, both federal and state, in this project. My understanding is they are extremely close to closing. In fact, my understanding is it's imminent. And we have been assured on multiple occasions by both the developer and, importantly, by the construction manager, Gil Bain, that actually they are on track to deliver the project when we must have it, which would be November 2016, because we have to be teaching in there in January of 2017.
You're going to make that.
And we're told we will make that. And we keep insisting we have to make it, and they keep saying you will.
URI's endowment is about a third of the size of the one for UConn. What can be done to improve that situation? Actually,
I'm surprised we're that close to UConn's. And that's another thing that, by the way, goes back to your earlier question, is reflected in these rankings. URI has relatively modest endowments, and we have really ramped up fundraising over the last several years. It's been a priority of mine since I came. You know, my predecessor, Bob Carruthers, initiated, and we successfully completed a $125 million campaign. We actually raised considerably more than that. We are in the early planning stages of our next campaign. URI was just a little late to the game. Significantly late to the game of waking up to the necessity of fundraising for a public institution. And it is. It's part of life. We have to do it. We have to do more of it. It's a priority of mine. We're confident that we will be very successful in our next campaign, which will be significantly larger than anything that we've done before. We're building an organization to make that happen. It has to be professional. It has to know what it's doing. It has to be experienced. We're building that infrastructure in the foundation right now, and working with our potential donors and others to prepare for that.
President Dooley, we have to go to a commercial break now, but before we go, you have a URI Kingston campus, you have a URI Providence campus, and now a Cuba campus?
We will have a site in Cuba where we will be sending students. A couple years ago, well, about a year ago, we had two very distinguished Cuban scholars actually hosted at URI as part of our International Visiting Scholars Program. And they went through all that you had to go through back a year ago, all the rigmarole to get into the country and visit our campus. Very positive visits. They had a great time. The students really enjoyed getting to know them. That laid a stage for a very productive and now ongoing relationship with Cuban academics. There's a lot that we can do there. We've sent students there already on short-term visits. We have faculty there. In fact, we have a group there now, or soon on their way back. Many research opportunities and educational opportunities in Cuba. We're excited about the possibilities of engagement there.
Dr. David Dooley, President of the University of Rhode Island, thank you very much for joining us on the program. And when we come back, let's get a report card on good government from our next guest, the Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island, John Marion. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Political reporter from Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis, joins us on the panel this week, and our guest on the second half of the program is the Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island, John Marion. John, welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right, let's start with my favorite topic, and that is government transparency. You're part of Access RI, which commissioned a report by Muckrock, Massachusetts-based news organization that focuses on making government more transparent. How did Rhode Island do?
Not very well. So, as you know, in 2012, we made some changes to the public records law. This coalition we're part of, Access, wanted to see how by 2014 those changes were being implemented. And so we hired Muckrock to audit all 39 cities and towns, 24 state agencies and departments, and we saw a pretty broad failure of compliance with many of the changes in the law. It's a whole host of changes, including making different types of records public, requiring certain types of trainings and certifications. And we saw a number of failures by state agencies, by local agencies, by police departments, school departments.
Is this online?
Yes.
This report?
So there's a website just for the coalition, accessri.org. And it has this audit and all the past audits.
You know what I'll do? We'll put it in the Newsmakers site on WPRI.com so folks can catch it there. All right, so the Attorney General's office, you showed them this. They filed a host of complaints. And did that surprise you that they took that action?
Well, so we filed the complaints. So we chose what we thought were the most egregious examples, sent letters against 14 municipalities and state agencies. The Attorney General's office, they have a division that's in charge of policing these things. They came back in 12 of those 14 entities, municipalities, state agencies. They found at least one violation, if not more than one violation. So
did they get it right?
Half right. There were some disagreements. They didn't find violations in a number of our complaints. There were some disagreements that we, the coalition members, which includes us, the ACLU, League of Women Voters, and others, really didn't agree with their perspective on how they interpreted the law there. For instance, they said we waived, there's a 10-day rule or a 48-hour rule for getting certain police records. We referenced the wrong part of the statute in our letter requesting the records. They took more than 48 hours. They said we waived our right, and our complaint about that was not valid. So we're not 100% happy with what they found, but we think it vindicates the complaints that 12 of the 14 entities had some violation.
John, you spend a lot of time at the State House when the General Assembly is in session. You're certainly an energetic advocate for good government, but the legislature isn't going to necessarily listen to what you're calling for. So have advocates like you done enough to build a citizen movement that would be more effective in advocating for changes?
You know, that's a great question. So there have been a couple of moments in time in Rhode Island's recent history where we've seen true citizens movements. The most notable was after the RISD crisis, right? People were mad as hell that literally money was taken out of their pocket. And they got organized around groups like ours, broad coalitions like, I'm going to forget the name of it. It was before my time, you know, and they brought widespread change. And then there was the separation of powers movement that kind of grew out of that a decade ago, achieved separation of powers. We haven't seen that sort of groundswell. It's been more fragmented in recent years.
You named examples like decades ago. A quarter a century ago was RISD, you know.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there are a lot of explanations for it. Some of the organizations that were once more powerful, Operation Clean Government, had shrunk in size, and so we've lost some coalition partners who used to be more vigorous. Some of it is these issues haven't quite hit people in the pocketbook as directly, or the sorts of reforms we're talking about aren't the reforms that speak to some of the problems they see. So, for instance, 38 studios, that wasn't really our thing because we're not RIPEC. I'm not going to go talk about moral obligation bonds because I don't really have the foggiest idea of what a moral obligation bond is. And that's really more of a fiscal question than a structural question in a lot of ways. But I think it's a good point. We haven't seen that groundswell.
On a different note, we saw the abrupt end to the legislative session. Do you attribute that more to legislative infighting or the influence of lobbyists? Because we know that a powerful lobbyist, Robert Goldberg, was involved in the chicken coop issue, which was a big issue at the end of the session.
Yeah, you know, so I attribute it to the fact that we have probably the most powerful legislature in the United States when you look across the 50. And then among those same 50 legislatures, we have the most, or nearly the most centralized legislatures, meaning the power rests almost exclusively in the hands of two people, the Speaker and the Senate President. And when you have that sort of centralized power, it's a recipe for what happened a month ago, which is they disagreed about something and they called it quits. And in other states, you might have 34 states, the governor can call them back. Right. The governor can say, you're coming in a special session, we still have work to do. Not in Rhode Island, because as you know, in Rhode Island, we have a traditionally extremely weak governor, very strong legislature. So I'm not surprised this happened because the potential's been there all along.
We have a weak governor's model, strong legislature, as you pointed out, but yet Governor Raimondo didn't veto a single bill this year. Did that?
Yeah, that surprised me.
Yeah.
You know, by numbers, they didn't pass nearly as much legislation as they typically would. So that may play a role. But I was surprised that there was nothing that she found objectionable in the dozens and dozens of pieces of legislation. And, you know, maybe there's some politics involved there in you know, trying to send a signal of trying to get things next session.
So our primary is in early September. One of the latest in the nation, I think. Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea wants to move the primary earlier. I imagine you support that.
So just to clarify, that's the regular primary. We also have a presidential preference primary in April. So when people hear primary, they may be thinking of that next year. So we haven't taken a position yet. I have a board that decides you know, what issues and what positions we take on issues. We started to debate it based on her comments.
And what are the pros and cons?
Show. You know, so the pros are it helps with military voters. This is the main reason, right? You have soldiers deployed in forward positions overseas. It's hard to get them a ballot. And most importantly, get it returned in time. Because if it's not returned in time, if it comes a day late, it doesn't get counted. And there's no excuse for not counting the ballot of a soldier who's deployed on behalf of this country, you know, fighting on behalf of this country. That said, the primary con is when do you put it, right? Do you put it in July? Do you put it in August? We all have talked about when we're taking vacation. People aren't around. So if you put it in June, it changes a lot of things. It may make campaigns more expensive because you have a longer time to campaign for the general election.
I have just about a minute left in the program. The conventional wisdom, too, is the party in power doesn't want it moved because a minority party can't gain the sort of traction that they need going into the general election. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think there's some validity to that as an argument. I think empirically that has to be looked at, and that's what we'll do. There are plenty of people who've studied these questions for a living, universities, and we need to go and look at what they've found, because if you're going to put a lot of effort into a reform like that, you better be sure it's going to produce the results you want.
Within 30 seconds here, as Ian pointed out, you're up at the General Assembly a lot. You're sort of plugged in there. Do you think they're going to come back in the fall for a special session?
So I don't know if I'm plugged in, but an
observer.
I'm a close observer. The public signals have been mixed, right? The Speaker has indicated yes. The President at this table has indicated no. My guess, educated guess, is that they will at least come back for these judicial appointments and maybe do a couple other things.
John Marion, Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island, thank you for joining us. If you missed any of it, it's online, WPRI.com. For Ian Donis, I'm Tim White. We will see you next week on Newsmakers.